Well, good morning. I make it 10:30, so we'll get our webinar started. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Ben Grunberg, partner at Grunberg Co, who's going to be presenting our webinar this morning, all geared around pivoting your business. We do have a Q&A session at the end of Ben's presentation, so please use the chat or the Q&A panel on your Zoom toolbar to put your questions forward, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can, either as we go along or towards the end. I'll hand over to Ben at this point, and see you for the Q&A at the end. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everyone. As Jay said, welcome to our latest webinar on pivoting your business. I'll be talking about what is a business pivot, what are the risks, and how best to go about it. Now, as most of you know, Grunberg Co was established in 1990 and is growing quite quickly to become a top 100 accountancy firm. Our growth has been solely through recommendations, and we're now one of the leading practices for owned and managed businesses in London. So, bear with me, sorry, with the technical glitch. Okay, so what is pivoting? Now, as it sounds, a business pivot is a change in strategic direction or change in the business, an element of the business as a whole. You may have heard this term used when describing quite seismic changes to business, such as great but little known example. Starbucks was originally started in 1971, selling coffee beans and machines, but pivoted their business model in the 1980s to what we see today. And it's quite a drastic shift from selling one product to opening these European style coffee houses. And that's really changed their format. But a pivot doesn't need to be so drastic a change to the company as a whole, and can be as subtle as a shift in marketing strategy or a system and control. And you'll find that most companies are pivoting and making small pivots throughout their lifetime, often as a reaction to technological or economic changes. What I'd like to hope is that after this webinar, you're able to better recognize these pivots, these changes, take more control over them, and use this as an opportunity to implement and potentially identify valuable pivots in the future. Now, to help you visualize the concept behind pivoting your business and the potential benefits from doing so, I wanted to run through some great examples which we've seen over the last few months, mainly as a result of the side effects of COVID and people's reaction to it. Now, changing your product can be quite an easy pivot to visualize, and a great example of this is not one of our clients, but Lotus Cupcakes. Now, during COVID, they noted a swift decline in their sales. There's less of a demand for their sweet cakes, and they recognize the need for more sustainable products such as fruit and vegetables. And obviously, this needed to be delivered directly to people's doors as people were struggling to leave their homes. And you'll know during this time, the early stages of COVID, the lockdown, the retailers were, the shelves were being stripped and there was less products out there. So they used their existing chain of operations, and they were able to quickly shift from selling cupcakes to selling these food boxes. It's a large shift away from unhealthy products to what they now sell. And this drastic shift was able to be done quite quickly, quite smoothly, using their existing setup, their operations, and the model that they already had in place. So it shows you how they could use their existing skill set to quite quickly and drastically pivot their business. Now, obviously, most pivots don't need to be this big and that drastic. And pivoting your distribution streams is kind of a more straightforward change that you can do. And a great example of this from a much smaller entity is what we've all seen from the health and fitness industry in the last few months. Now, personal trainers and instructors are no longer able to do their face-to-face, one-on-one sessions that they used to do. And most of these instructors have moved to a Zoom, Google Hangouts, or Teams-based session, which is done virtually. And they've taken this one step further by not only just doing these one-to-one sessions virtually, but doing one-to-many, and able to open their market up to a much bigger audience. It means that they can charge less, but make more per session than they would have done on that one-to-one. They don't have the overheads of having to hire a hall, which they would have done if they were doing a one-to-many in the old normal format. And this means that they're now able to make more per hour, however long the session is. They have less overheads, so their bottom line is increasing, and it's actually benefiting them in this new structure, this new distribution of their historic product, effectively their service. And this has even allowed them to kind of get a much wider audience. We've seen clients now attract business and attract their clients from as far as Leeds, Manchester, and even as far as the US, which is a great way to grow a business which was historically a one-to-one personal level. Now, another example of a change in the distribution stream, but also a change in marketing strategy, comes from a food manufacturer. Again, we've seen this in the fashion industry as well, but most food manufacturers sold direct to wholesalers and retailers. With lockdown, again, retailers and distributors culled the products that they were buying and distributing and focused on priority items. So this meant that there was a massive kind of loss in distribution stream and focus and sales for our clients. And they redirected this to try and sell their products directly to the consumers through their own websites. And in doing so, they are able to attract greater margins because they don't have to have a middleman in between. They are able to own the relationship with the clients, which is hugely valuable by offering discounts and offers and obtaining the email addresses and the marketing strategy. And in order to facilitate this, obviously they changed their marketing strategy to make themselves far more visible to the end user and direct that traffic to their own website. Again, this pivot has resulted in greater margins, higher sales, and better bottom line. And a final kind of example of a pivot that you can do, and something which we can all do and continuously do throughout the development and growth of our businesses, is pivoting with systems and controls. And it's one of the easier changes to make. Obviously, you can do quite a large change or a small tweak here and there. But a great example of this, what we've seen during the downtime, is that companies who used to have kind of antiquated systems have used this time, this period of closure, to streamline their business models and automating some of the back office, allowing them to kind of pack down for growth. So, and a good example is a large group of companies who historically prepared their accounts on Excel and Sage, the desktop version. And due to the day-to-day pressures of running the business and time constraints, they just haven't found the ability or the time to even assess this and see if there's any alternative way to do things. So with this kind of lockdown, a bit more time on their hands, we've helped migrate their systems to zero, automate a lot of the back office, bring in bank feeds, OCR technology, and in doing so, this will save a lot of man hours now that they're back up and open. So they've completely streamlined this back office and them to focus on more important things of the business than processing their books and records. Again, this is quite a proactive pivot because they've taken the time, they've assessed what they need to do. We help push them through this process. You'll find most pivots tend to be a reaction to change. The other ones I described and the examples I gave, they were all reactions to COVID. things where there was a threat to the business from a loss of income, and they've changed and pivoted their business model to react to that. Now, a pivot which is done by way of reaction is far less controllable. The speed of change needs to be much quicker. The opportunity to plan and to forecast what we need to do is much harder. And so it's a far bigger reaction. A proactive change can be very controlled. You can plan it. It's more efficient, and you can really judge what you want to get out of it, and ensure that that's achievable. Now, I say that using the example of the systems and controls because MTD is coming into effect even further next year, and there are large changes to the requirements for keeping digital records, which are constantly being brought out by the revenue. And this is an opportunity to really look forward and make sure that you can be proactive and ensure that you are automating what's can be quite tedious and simple function, such as bookkeeping, to ensure that you can make a proactive change and take advantage of growth in the future. Now, when pivoting a business, when to pivot a business is a big question. Now, obviously, changing and reacting to threats from the market, such as COVID, is a great example when you need to pivot the business. But there are other times and kind of red flags that you can keep in mind as to when is the right time to consider or look to pivot the whole or part of your business. Now, obviously, the last few months have given companies the kind of this necessity. But again, as I said before, the earlier you can do this, the more time you have to plan, and all being well, the more opportunities you can take advantage of. So going through kind of some of these points here is kind of they're the flags to when you should pivot. Now, feeling that you're behind the times it's a good example, and I say it is a feeling, and it's hard to put your finger on, but you will know when there's technological advances and cultural attitude or changes to your industry, which you feel that you may not be taking advantage of, or you may not be ahead of the game with. And from experience, and talking our own industry, there's always talk about offering the staff the ability to work from home, and I'm sure you've seen this in other industries, and this is quite a key point now. And we could see from our industry that boutique and larger firms were offering this to their staff, and this was becoming more and more talked about. But we're always concerned, and to be honest, I never thought it would be kind of viable for a business of our size and structure to have this home working policy. But obviously, we've made a success of this, and this has taught us that these type of changes where it's a cultural and technological advancement, which we haven't taken advantage of, actually is something that we can and should be looking at. And obviously, with the improvements in technology and the changes to culture that's continuous, this is something where agile working will be a part of our business going forward. Now, and some kind of easier ones to flag is when there's too much competition. Now, if you find your margins are depleting, you're finding it an increasing struggle to earn the same amount each year, you might be increasing your turnover, but your bottom line is deflating, then this is unlikely to change. It's unlikely to come to a point where your margins start growing again. So this is a real flag here as a point where you should be considering a different approach, looking to direct your business into a different niche, change your products to try and find those which offer higher margins, where there's less competition. Look at segmenting your market. These are tactics you can do to kind of step out of this downward spiral. Similar to the second point, lack of growth opportunities is another indication of the need to potentially pivot your business. You may find that you have an appetite and aspiration for growth, but the business is staying quite flat. In this instance, there might not be the opportunity to grow in the sector you're in. Could be due to competition, could just be due to the size of the sector. Pivoting your model, pivoting your distribution of your sales, you could obtain greater growth from different areas. The next points are quite obvious. If you see opportunity, it's a time to consider pivoting, time to consider taking advantage of that opportunity. And likewise, if you see threats, it's a time to consider how you would pivot away from those threats. And finally, changes in fashion, trends, or consumer needs. This is something which is ongoing. And I'm sure you've seen this with the want for healthy food, sustainable clothing, recycled products. Again, you may be supplying the same product, the same thing for the last 20 years. And it's a time to consider whether this product, which you supplied 20 years ago, is still it still attracts the same market and is still as fashionable and hits these key wants from a consumer now as it did 20 years ago. Now, with any pivot, there's obviously risks, and the key risks that you can bear in mind are cash flow. You don't have the buy-in, uncertainty, time resources, and opportunity costs. Now, cash flow is the obvious one. There's going to be a cost to some of these changes. Changing product isn't as straightforward. Well, it could be for something like Lola's Cupcake. You're just buying one product versus the another. But if you're selling something which you have to manufacture, there's a cost of prototyping and the cost of developing that product. So there's normally a cost to changing or pivoting your business model, and it's something that you just have to keep in mind. Again, not all of these risks can be avoided, but most of these can be mitigated to a degree using proactive approach and really planning how you go through the change. Buy-in from key stakeholders, investors, fellow directors, or even staff is a great example. Now, you may not have the buy-in at the beginning, but communication and managing the process of the change is a way to mitigate that risk and to stop these walls being put up as part of the process of change. Again, uncertainty, time and resources, these can all be forecast and factored into to ensure that you can manage those risks. So mitigating your risk comes from sufficient and detailed planning, as I say. Exploring the options, the upsides and downsides, to the change you had in mind. So that way you can really communicate why you're looking to do this, what the benefits are going to be of this pivot, and ensure that there is little in the way of downsides that you can't control. Now, going through the process of pivoting a business, there's no set formula, but I'd like to put the next 5 points as kind of a roadmap that I would use to go about pivoting a business. And depending on the type of pivot you do and the size of the pivot, you may not need to focus on all these points, and one or two may be more relevant than others. But I think this is a good approach to use for most changes to your business. Now, the first one is identifying the change. Really understanding what you want to do and what you want to achieve from this change is really important as a first point. You can undertake market research. Point 2 says to understand what your clients or staff want from your existing offering, what they like, what they don't like, and if you have a change in mind, what their impressions are of this change. These are really two vital points to understand whether the change is actually going to be good for you or whether it's not. You might have an idea, but it's a gut feeling. Without doing enough research or kind of investigation into the idea that you have, you're relying on your gut to decide whether this is a positive move for the business or not. That's not to say your gut would be wrong, but having this information, this backing, helps you to communicate what you want and what you feel to others who might not have the same gut feelings. Now, also identifying and undertaking market research, you can identify potentially segments in your market which you can direct your advertising and marketing to, areas where there might be high growth opportunities. For example, if you hit that plateau, if you're not undertaking market research, and you won't know whether there are other areas you can kind of feed into where there might be a much better area for growth. Now, point 3 is what I feel is the most important part of the pivot. And whether you do something small or something large, this is something where I think that there is always a value in doing a business plan and forecast. Now, this is your roadmap. This is something that's going to give you direction during the course of the change. It's something you can use to communicate to your staff. It's something that you could use for obtaining finance if you're looking for equity investment or even a loan from a bank. This is probably the most important part of the process, and an area where you can really identify where there are uncertainties, where there are risks, and look to mitigate those. So the business plan goes hand in hand with the forecast, and the forecast can be used to show you what the cost is of the change, how to flex the forecast to make sure that you know the worst case and best case scenarios, where there's going to be the biggest change in the process, and where there's going to be the biggest cost in the process. And by doing this, you can identify then really how much this is going to cost you to change, to pivot, and when you need that money. And even if you have that money in the bank, or whether you need to obtain that from external sources. Without doing this, it really is a shot in the dark if you're trying to make quite a large change or a large pivot to the business model. And as I say, the 3 clear points to focus on within the business plan and forecast is identifying your resources. And that is what do you have as resources, and that's staff, time, money, and what do you need to make this change successful. Again, looking at your staff, do you need to hire someone? Looking at your time, do you need to find ways of moving your existing work away into someone else's remit so that you can save some of your time to focus on this change? And obviously, finances, it's part of the forecast there. Make clear, defined goals as part of the forecast and the business plan. We use the terminology SMART, which is, apologies if I forget this, but it's specific, measurable, accurate, reliable, and timely. So reliable, you can say realistic. Effectively, these are goals which are achievable, and you can put a pin and say, this is what I need to achieve in this date, and you can then work out what you need to do to get there. And making these goals and these steps along the way can give you control over the change. And this gives you something to focus on, and gives you, again, your roadmap. And outline key performance indicators, KPIs. When you're making a change in how you're marketing, if you're changing how what your product you're selling, there's going to be a reason why you're making those changes. For example, if your intention is to improve your margins, then clearly your gross profit margin would be a useful KPI to monitor. If your intention for the change is to improve your debt collection, then debtor days, the number of days it takes you to get your money in from when you send your invoice, is a really useful KPI for you to monitor. When you identify this during your business plan, you can then factor this into the actual process thereafter. And using kind of resources like Futurity or Spotlight, which are great apps that link to your bookkeeping system, they will give you an indication of what these KPIs are doing on a real-time basis. And you can monitor that on an ongoing basis thereafter. And it doesn't have to be just during the change and the pivot, but it can be something that you can focus on indefinitely from your business. Now, as I keep mentioning before, communication is a very good way to mitigate the lack of buy-in and any resistance to change. So once you have this process in place, communicating this to your staff or those who need to be on board to make the change is a very important step. You can identify and you can tell them what the SMART goals are, what the KPIs are, and you can encourage them to achieve these. And the final thing is, once you've made that change, and a really important point again, is reassess. A lot of people make the change, say, okay, the year down the line, I'm not sure if that was the right thing that we should have done. Well, if you don't know, it's because you haven't been monitoring it. And looking at whether that change has been a good thing for your business or not is really important to do once the change has happened, a few months after, and a constant monitor from your business. Now, as I said before, the best pivots are those which have been fully thought through in advance and planned. And as I said, with a detailed process. Obviously, this is hard to do when you're reacting to threats and changes in the market, such as COVID. But with this knowledge and the want for change and the ability to identify when to pivot, you can make these proactive and really thought out changes to your business in the future. And pivoting your business shouldn't be a reaction to changes, and it really should be a mindset that you adopt. Being open to change, forward-looking, and agile means that you can continuously make small changes to the business whilst keeping growth and keeping the company developing and taking advantage of opportunities as and when they arise. Finally, I would say as accountants and advisors, we offer a real business strategy solution. We don't just focus on compliance, as I'm sure you know. We work with our clients, and we do offer a solution which would work with you across regular meetings, restructuring, or a general review and overhaul of your back office and systems. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us after the webinar, and I look forward to answering any questions you have now. So let me unmute Joe. And see if there's any questions that we have.
Hi Ben, thanks very much for that. I can't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A at the moment. So
I think I've got one here. I want to pivot my business, but I'm not sure, or I don't know how. Well, if you don't know how to pivot, it's going back to those steps that I said before, and it's identifying what you want to do to change. If you're not sure if it's the right time for you, again, it's about planning. So there's 2 points to that. You're not sure if you want to pivot, so there's an understanding why you're thinking about it, what the opportunities are that you're trying to achieve, what is wrong with the business that you want to change. For example, if you're not sure whether your margins are sufficient, whether your turnover can grow, if you're not sure about it, then undertaking market research, understanding what your clients want and their needs are, you could find that the simple change that all you need to do is increase your prices. Or you could find that you are charging too much, and actually by reducing your prices, you can take an opportunity of much larger clientele. So undertaking market research will really answer that question of I'm not sure. And what you need to do to change, if you've undertaken and understand what you want to change and whether you want to change, it then comes to that plan. Planning what you need to change, finding out and understanding the end result, you can then work backwards the steps that you need to achieve it. For example, if the end result is to increase your profit margin, or it's to attract a different type of clientele, move from a one-to-one offering to a one-to-many offering, then you can understand the steps in between which get you there. It could be a change in marketing strategy. It could be change in your structure, your internal structure. You might need to employ an employee. There's going to be micro changes and small pivots. in the process to understand how to make that large pivot that you want to make overall. Now we've got a second.
Yeah, we have a question here from, sorry to cut across you, a question here from Juliet about the apps that you mentioned in relation to KPIs. Could you just repeat that?
Okay, so so one of the changes that we've really seen in the industry and the market over the last few years is the move from these antiquated bookkeeping systems to an online cloud-based software, such as Xero, QuickBooks, or Sage. I start with Xero because I would highly recommend that one over the other two, personal preference. But these apps, by being cloud-based and by having bank feeds in place and by having OCR, which is effectively a way of inputting your invoices into the system, you can really manage your affairs on a real-time basis. And this means that you can adapt and add these add-ons, as we said, these apps, to your software, which can really pick out the information that means something to you. Now, Futurely and Spotlight, and there's a couple others out there, they are effectively add-ons to your bookkeeping software, and they will go in, take the data out, and just project those KPIs or whatever you want to see. And there's boards that we can put in place for you. We can help set this up for you. And once it's up and running, it's live information. And this information is there for you to log in, see what are my KPIs, what's my margin this month compared to last month? What is my margin this month compared to this month last year? How are my sales doing on a product by product basis or a month by month basis? You can look at any KPI which is of interest to you, and you can develop the tools to do that on a real-time basis. So I've got a follow-on question here, which is, what app would you recommend for online payments to link to Xero? Again, one of the things where we've seen changes is in automating back office. So by bank feeds, they link your bank account directly to your bookkeeping software. So you're not having to manually process that information. It saves a lot of time. But that also goes to things like Stripe and Shopify and other online systems, PayPal. They can be linked to your bookkeeping software as well to automate the processing. And this can really be a small change that you do to a business, which can save a lot of time.
Okay. Question here from Mike. Looking at the new normal post-COVID, which industries are more likely to benefit from pivoting?
I would say every industry, really. I mean, there are those who have already done a pivot and are for taking advantage of the changes. I personally have always been one for change is a positive thing, and I feel that over the last few years, and especially the next few years, companies who have historically done the same thing are being replaced and having their market share eaten into by companies who are trying to be differentiators, who are trying to be disruptors. So I always think that change is important for every business, and not just because of COVID, but you'll see things like everyone that comments the high street is dead. Well, people have shifted from selling things through bricks and mortar to selling things online. And it means that you have less rent and overheads, and you can take advantage of that by reducing your sales prices or obtaining better margins by selling direct to consumers. You have service industries who are changing from having large offices and the old school meetings to virtually, like we are now. Now that can help save time and resources. You are having people looking at where they used to offer a one-to-one product to trying to offer that to one-to-many, or where they used to offer a product to a niche area or select industry. They're able to expand that offering to a much larger network and cross-pollinate that across different industries. So there's change and opportunity in every industry, I would say. And I think this can be something micro to something quite large.
Okay, Ben. Another question in from Nick. In terms of banking, are challenger banks being used versus normal traditional banking? And are there banks you prefer using to integrate with Xero?
It's an interesting one as well. There's been a massive shift and pivot in the banking industry, as I'm sure you've seen, from these traditional high street banks to challenger banks. You had the high street banks pivot away from giving you a manager to making everything online and digital, which I feel has actually not been the best change for them, but it has obviously their bottom line focus there. Challenger banks, again, they have everything has its right place and its right time. Challenger banks have been great for businesses who want to open up a bank quickly. They're very focused on having streamlined solutions, which make them very attractive. And that's something that definitely the old school high street banks should be looking at and going, we should be doing something similar. But if you're looking for growth and you're looking for complexities as you grow, whether you want to take out loans, whether you want to take out debt financing or other financing options, those growth opportunities really are only available from a bank which has a much wider offering. Otherwise, you end up paying kind of high costs or trying to go for a best of breed solution where you try and take a debt financing from that company and a loan from that company, and it becomes an administration headache. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to go with your business as to which bank is most suitable for you. In terms of those which have a better feed with Xero or QuickBooks or online systems, they're each their own. There are some those that still don't have bank feeds, and I would stay away from them, clearly very behind the times. And then there are those who have been some of the first to step into the open banking system. And open banking means a much tighter and streamlined connection with Xero. And I personally would go for a bank which has an open banking connection with Xero or the QuickBooks or whichever software you're looking at.
Okay, thanks very much, Ben. I think that answers all of our questions and brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much, Ben, for delivering that content for us. We will, and we have made a recording of this, so we will provide an on-demand version to everybody who's attended and put that onto our website and social media channels. And we look forward to the next one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.